Hello, Secretary Castro. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm so excited to be here. You're one of the candidates who've talked about trans people a lot on the trail, and I'm wondering, first off, so I read that when you were the mayor of San Antonio, you were the first mayor to be the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade. I've seen a picture of you standing in front of a Black Trans Lives Matter banner. So you have you've thought about trans people. You're not new to trans people. What's been your evolution on that?
Well, I think like a lot of Americans, over the last few years, learning more and more, becoming more and more sensitive to the fact that we have 2 million transgender individuals in the United States, and oftentimes they are treated as second-class citizens. And so, as mayor of San Antonio, and then as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and now as candidate for President of the United States, I wanted to make sure that we do everything that we can to ensure that in this country, everybody counts, that we have no second-class citizens, that transgender individuals are treated every bit as much as every other American.
So you've been a candidate who's talked about trans people on the trail, and you were the first person to bring us up in the debates, in the first set of debates, and you talked about the importance of reproductive rights for all people.
That was important for me to do because I wanted to make sure that we're addressing an audience of 50 million people watching that debate, that we're as inclusive as possible, and also that we make it clear to the American people that our policy is going to reflect the concerns and the needs of everybody, including, of course, the trans community.
Trans people need reproductive health care, just like they need health care. And health care is a big issue this election, maybe the biggest for most Americans. What can we expect from your health care plan, and how does it impact trans people?
Well, I'd like to see a healthcare system where everybody is able to access healthcare, where we base it off of Medicare. But if somebody has a private health insurance plan that they want to hold on to, it's a strong plan. I think that people should be able to hold on to it. The healthcare system that we transition into should absolutely have strong non-discrimination protections so that trans individuals are not subjected to discrimination in our healthcare system. And we should be clear that whether it's reproductive healthcare or other types of healthcare, that trans individuals and the LGBTQ community should fully be covered the way that anybody else would. I mean, that's a commitment we absolutely have to make as a country.
That's amazing. One of my regrets over the last couple of years is I've never been able to personally thank you for the great work you did as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was a real honor to serve President Obama as Secretary of HUD. One of the things that I wanted to make sure of at HUD was that we try and root out a lot of the discrimination that still exists in the housing market. And so we had a real focus on fair housing. One of the things that we did, as you know, was the transgender rule, to make sure that if a transgender individual seeks shelter at a publicly funded shelter, that they are accommodated according to their preference. I was glad that we accomplished that. I was also happy that we made a strong push, certainly stronger than this administration, to make sure that we further desegregate the United States. Those are the kinds of things that I'm proud of that we did, in addition to trying to address teen homelessness. And we know that about 40% of teens out there who are homeless come from the LGBTQ community. I had a chance to visit Los Angeles and other communities to hear about some of the stories of young people who felt ostracized in their homes, who ended up on the streets. And at HUD, we were focused on creating partnerships with the True Colors Fund and others to try and bring down that number of teens who are homeless, including from the LGBTQ community.
That's great. Well, thank you. At Netroots Nation, you talked about transgender people being cut out of the policy process too often. I will say, I don't think we felt that at your Housing and Urban Development Department. But what do you mean about that, and how would we work to fix that?
Well, I think a lot of times the transgender community has been overlooked. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to mention that in our conversation and debate about reproductive rights. Um, sometimes that's intentionally, maybe sometimes that's with ill will. A lot of times it's just because it's not thought of. But what we're trying to do is put everybody's interests at the table to make sure that they're heard. And whether it's in the rulemaking process, in federal departments, or in state legislatures across the country, or in Congress or city councils, my point in Netroots was, my hope is that concerns from the transgender community can be fully heard and part of the equation and the policy mix, so that we have policy that more accurately reflects the needs and concerns of everybody who has a stake in the future of our country.
That's great. Something that's been central to your campaign and is I think the biggest crisis right now is the hateful crisis that the president has caused at the border. At least 2 transgender people have died in detention, Joana Medina Leon and Roxana Hernandez. This is a really important issue for trans people. So what can we expect from your administration?
You're right, and as you know, the federal government has created communities of transgender individuals at 2 or 3 of these detention centers in the Southwest. We know that if there are individuals that are some of the most vulnerable, most likely to be the subject of hate and violence, to be vulnerable to that, it's transgender individuals. And I've called for ending that kind of detention in our country. And in my administration, we would not be detaining people the way that we are in this administration, whether they're adults or they're children. Now, if they're adults, if they've committed a serious crime and there's a reason, independent reason to detain them, of course we would. But that's not the vast majority of people who are seeking asylum or who have just crossed the border. So I want to end that kind of detention in our country, beginning with these for-profit private prisons, and make sure that in the meantime, that transgender individuals are treated with respect and with dignity, and that they're safe there.
Okay. In addition to scaring migrant children, children of color, Muslim children, the president is also doing a lot to terrify transgender children and their families. And education policy is really important, and they've tried to roll back some really good advancements from the Obama administration. What can trans people expect from you in education policy?
What I would like to see is classrooms where a child who may be wondering or questioning their identity, that they're able to feel comfortable and accepted and loved in that educational environment, that we have teachers in classrooms who are sensitive to children, whatever, however they find them, that these are schools that are free from discrimination, free from bullying, and also in the long run, I think, at the state level, that textbooks and other materials accurately reflect the reality and the contributions and the value that members of the LGBTQ community add to this country. I think that's one of the most important things in the long run, is that this next generation actually understands what people add to the country who are LGBTQ, so they don't see them as the other.
One of the big advancements in the Obama administration was just some simple guidance that taught schools how to interact with and properly respect and educate trans students. And they've taken that back. Would we expect in a Castro administration that would be put back in place?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, one of my first orders of business as president would be to go through the entire list along all these federal departments of what this administration has done that rolled back what we did in the Obama administration, and then go and make that progress back for the country, including that guidance that they've given to schools.
Great. And finally, you've never been in Congress, but the president has an important role in what is a real top priority, a legislative priority for trans people, the Equality Act. Would we expect to see leadership from the White House on getting the Equality Act into law?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my priorities, and it's something that I talk about all the time out there on the campaign trail, that if we're going to be the fairest nation on earth, because that's one of the goals that I have for this country, to be the fairest nation on earth, that we pass the Equality Act so that we make sure that if you're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, that you can't be discriminated against when you go and look for an apartment, or can't be discriminated against in your place of employment, or when you're looking for a job, or in any other context. I want to make sure that we don't have any second-class citizens in this country, and the Equality Act is an important step to do that.
Secretary Castro, thank you so much for being here with us today, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.